Hello, everyone, and welcome to this presentation that focuses on the role of biochar and its potential role in addressing climate change. Now, soils store 3.3 times more carbon than in the atmosphere, so many researchers in the field of carbon dioxide removal have focused on efforts to enhance soil storage of carbon. These methods have included applying crop cover, adding materials such as compost, and low or no-till agriculture. However, this lecture focuses on perhaps the most prominent and hopeful of soil-based approaches that have gained currency in recent years, and this is biochar, which we will discuss in detail throughout this presentation. Biochar seeks to leverage soils as well as other properties of the process to store carbon dioxide. And here's how I will proceed in this presentation. First of all, I'll provide an overview of the biochar process. Second of all, talk about the potential benefits of biochar with a focus on addressing greenhouse gas emissions. Third, talk about the potential risks of biochar deployment. Fourth, talk about the current status of biochar deployment, both in terms of production and sales. And then finally, talk about research needs going forward. So first of all, let's talk about the biochar process itself. And an explanation of biochar necessarily has to start with the photosynthetic process and the formation of biomass. Biomass is the plant material derived from the reaction between carbon dioxide in the air and water and sunlight via photosynthesis to produce carbohydrates that form the building blocks of biomass. The term biomass encompasses dedicated energy crops, trees, residues from agriculture and forestry, and various organic waste streams, including food, yard, and municipal waste, and animal manure. Biomass stores substantial amounts of carbon dioxide, an estimated 60 billion tons annually. However, this uptake of carbon dioxide is relatively short-lived, with very low amounts of carbon dioxide retained after disposal via burning. Only about 3% of the CO2 stays in the biomass at that point, or biological decomposition, simply letting, for example, crop residues rot in the field, in which case less than 10 to 20% of that CO2 is still locked in that biomass after 5 to 10 years. These processes of decomposition or burning also release substantial amounts of methane, a greenhouse gas with a global warming potential of 84 times that of carbon dioxide over a 20-year period and 28 times over a 100-year period. The production of biochar, a charcoal-like substance, is a process that contributes to much longer residence time for carbon dioxide and biomass, as well as provide soil-based co-benefits. And that's what we'll focus on now in this section. So initially, let's talk about how the biochar process works. So the most common method to produce biochar is the pyrolysis process. Pyrolysis is the thermo-decomposition of biomass by superheating it at temperatures between, in most cases, 350 to 700 degrees Celsius in the absence of oxygen. Biomass feedstocks can include organic waste, such as wood chips, agricultural byproducts or switchgrass, municipal waste, food waste, manure, as well as dedicated feedstocks, such as plantation-grown trees. And this provides a composition overall of the key feedstocks that are provided provide biochar production. As you can see The largest of these are in-forest residual biomass, followed closely by agricultural byproducts and then residues from wood processing. The pyrolysis process yields a solid residue resembling charcoal, which we term biochar, as well as producing bio-oil, which can be upgraded to fuels, including biodiesel, and synthetic gas, known as syngas. And biochar is produced in various ways. Biochar-producing cook stoves are the most popular in developing countries. The pyrolysis temperature in these stoves can be about 450 to about 500 degrees Celsius, and they produce some biochar, with most of the stoves producing somewhere between 25 to 30% biochar by weight from the initial feedstock. Another more rudimentary process for biochar production is the construction of simple charcoal kilns. Or biochar can be produced in large-scale commercial plants. The pyrolysis equipment at commercial scale typically operates at between 350 to 700 degrees Celsius. There are two types of pyrolysis systems in use today: fast pyrolysis and slow pyrolysis. Fast pyrolysis processes biomass at temperatures of between 600 to 1,000 degrees Celsius, and the process can be completed in seconds. Slow pyrolysis, by contrast, heats biomass at temperatures of 300 to 700 degrees Celsius, and the process can take several minutes to hours to complete. Fast pyrolysis tends to produce more oils and liquids, while slow pyrolysis produces more syngas and biochar. An alternative system for producing biochar is a gasification process, whereby biomass is exposed to steam at high temperatures of between 800 to 1,000 degrees Celsius for a relatively long period of about 30 minutes, and this results in an activated char with a high surface area. Some systems combine pyrolysis and gasification processes. All right, so with this overview in mind, let's talk about the benefits of the biochar process with a focus on carbon sequestration. So in terms of carbon sequestration benefits of biochar, there are a couple that we can highlight. First of all, biochar increases the recalcitrance, or the resistance to decomposition, of carbon storage in biomass. Conversion of biomass to biochar convert up to 50% of the original carbon content in biomass feedstocks into a highly condensed and chemically stable form. Pyrolysis drives hydrogen and oxygen from the hydrocarbons, resulting in a carbon-rich solid material. On a molecular level, the dominant form of carbon in biochar is aromatic. It's organized in hexagonal carbon rings that promote chemical stability. This contrasts with the aliphatic hydrocarbon chains, which are joined only by single chains that predominate in most plant matter. The carbon rings in biochar interlink to form sheets, which are highly recalcitrant. That is, they're resistant to microbial decomposition, or they're protected by mineral soil particles. Pyrogenic carbons naturally formed in wildfires exhibit similar structures, and they show persistence in the environment for a millennia. One recent study estimated that 48 to 54% of the net reductions in carbon dioxide emissions associated with biochar come from massively increasing the durability or recalcitrance of carbon in biomass as a consequence of this process. Studies have estimated that the production of biochar can lock up carbon for 500 to 1,000 years or more. Creating biochar reduces carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, because the process takes a theoretically carbon-neutral process of naturally decaying organic matter and subsequent regrowth of biomass and turns it into approximately a 20% carbon negative process. And this is attributable to the fuel production component of the process. As we talked about above, you can get production of things such as bio-oils and syngases that can be utilized for fuel production, which results in much lower greenhouse gas emissions, especially carbon dioxide, than through the combustion of fossil fuels. The second route by which biochar can effectuate carbon sequestration is by enhancing soil carbon retention. Soil carbon emissions, also known as soil respiration, are the main pathway for soil organic carbon to enter the atmosphere. It's the primary mechanism of carbon loss from terrestrial ecosystems that contribute to climate change. Soils hold approximately 2,500 gigatons, or billion tons of carbon, accounting for more than 90% of the terrestrial ecosystem's carbon reservoir. However, agriculture, forestry, and other land use processes contribute about 25% of anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions, with an annual flux of between 4.3 and 5.5 gigatons of CO2 equivalent emissions per year. One study recently concluded that biochar can increase the size of the soil carbon pool by 0.12 tons of carbon per hectare per year within the first year of management, and up to 0.28 tons of carbon per hectare per year after 10 years. And the storage of carbon in these soils could have a half-life of 1,000 years, according to one study. A recent review of field studies with the application of biochar to soils concludes the following. 1. Biochar resulted in a mean average 11% decrease of CO2 emissions in 14 of 29 field studies. Now, note that means that there were a lot of them that saw no real increase in the locking up of CO2 in those soils, or in some cases an increase, and that's something to remember, and a theme that cuts across all of what we're going to discuss. Second of all, these studies indicated that there was a reduction in CO2 emissions observed in soils with lower soil organic content, about a 27% decrease. However, when biochar was applied to soils that had a higher soil organic content, you actually saw an increase in CO2 emissions. And so again, one of the things that needs to be emphasized with biochar is that the results are extremely context specific in the context of the kind of soils that you're dealing with, the soil organic content, the climate, the kind of biochar feedstocks that are applied, the length of time that are applied, and so forth, right? And we're going to talk about that again and again during this presentation, but I wanted to highlight it here. Another number of recent studies have indicated that applying biochar in combination with fertilizer or other soil amendments can have a highly salutary benefit in terms of locking CO2 into soils, with several studies indicating a 61 to 78% reduction in CO2 emissions. Research indicates that biochar could enhance soil health in several ways that could ensure much more recalcitrance of carbon in soils. First of all, biochar can decrease the proportion of labile organic carbon in soils. And labile carbon is a form of carbon that more easily decomposes. Second of all, biochar has a large adsorption capacity. That is the capability to effectuate the adhesion of molecules, in this case carbon, to a surface. And this absorption of soil CO2 molecules can help lock up carbon dioxide in soils. Thirdly, biochar application to soil influences soil physical and chemical properties, including water content, porosity, and pH in ways that make soil carbon more recalcitrant. Fourth, biochar also combines with minerals in soil to form soil aggregates in which biochar is locked up. This can in turn lower soil mineralization rates and raise organic matter content, and this can prevent the breakdown of soil organic carbon. And then finally, biochar applications can significantly affect the diversity and activities of microbial taxa that are involved in CO2 production. However, again, these observed potential positive impacts are very context specific and can depend on precise conditions of pyrolysis, the nature of the feedstocks that are involved, and the characteristics of background soils. There are also potential co-benefits associated with utilizing biochar and spreading it on land surfaces. One of them is in terms of potential reductions of two very potent greenhouse gases, methane and nitrous oxides. First of all, let's start off with methane. Across field studies, biochar was found to have decreased methane emissions, with 15 studies reporting an average reduction of 62%. And this was even higher when applied in conjunction with chemical fertilizer or soil amendments. And there's been a couple of suggested causal mechanisms for why biochar may help to suppress methane emissions from soils. First of all, biochar application generally increases soil pH, which favors the growth of methanotrophs, which metabolize methane. Second of all, biochar application decreases soil bulk density and increases the porosity of soils. And this favors oxidation of methane and uptake of methane by soil bacteria. However, it should be emphasized that some studies have shown increased methane emissions where biochar is applied to certain crops, such as rice, for example. And this may be because biochar can increase soil pH in rice paddies and increase the actual release of methane. Nitrous oxides also may potentially be locked up for longer in soils as a consequence of the application of biochar. Now, it should be emphasized at the outset that that nitrous oxide have a global warming potential of 310 times that of carbon dioxide over a 100-year period, right? So any policies that we have that can help address that greenhouse gas is extremely beneficial. In one analysis of 37 field studies in which biochar was applied to soils, 27 reported an average reduction of nitrous oxide emissions of 33% when coupled with compost or other soil amendments. And there's several potential reasons that biochar may decrease nitrous oxide emissions. First of all, the application of biochar significantly enhances soil aeration and oxygen concentration in the soil profile. This in turn may inhibit soil denitrification by microorganisms, which primarily occurs under suboxic conditions. Second of all, biochar application results in the absorption of ammonium and other nitrates to biochar particles. This then enhances plant growth, reduces the volatilization of ammonium, and immobilizes nitrogen compounds in the soils. And then finally, inhibition of nitrogen transformation processes at the nitrification stage may occur as a consequence of the application of biochar. However, as was true with methane and carbon dioxide, it has to be emphasized that this may not always be the case. One study found that application of biochar to forest soils significantly increased nitrous oxide emissions, and another looking at the application of biochar in temperate forest soils found no impact whatsoever. Another potential co-benefit of biochar application may be in terms of increased crop yields. One meta-analysis concluded that biochar can increase crop yields between 5 to 51%, though there were decidedly better results in tropical climates as opposed to temperate climates. Another cautionary note in this context is that many of these studies have been lab scale, and there's a clear need for well-designed, long-term field studies incorporating different crops and biochar feedstocks. A second reason that biochar may increase crop yields is, or the mechanism by which it could increase crop yields, is that first of all, it could raise soil pH. Second of all, it could enhance soil water retention. Third, it could improve nutrient availability. And then finally, it could act as a fertilizer substitute for nitrogen-based fertilizers. However, whether biochar is positive or negative in terms of agricultural production is once again contingent on an array of factors, including the type of raw material that's used for biochar production, the pyrolysis conditions, the physiochemical structure of the biochar, climate, and soil types, as well as the quantity of biochar that's applied. One of the most prominent aspects in this context appears to be climatic conditions. For example, a 2017 meta-analysis concluded that biochar has no effect on crop yield in temperate latitudes, while in tropical regions, biochar can result in a 25% increase in crop yields, at least according to this meta-analysis. It's also been found that biochar application could promote forest growth and reduce forest mortality. All right, those are some of the potential benefits of biochar applications with an emphasis on climate. Now let's talk about some of the risks associated with a biochar application. First of all, application of biochar to soil can induce radiative forcing by changing surface albedo, meaning that it would darken the soils and reduce the reflectivity, meaning that more incoming solar radiation could be absorbed, and this could in turn exert a warming impact. Quite frankly, the studies have been all over the place. Many of them don't show a substantial increase in temperatures that would offset the other benefits that we get, but there's clearly need for more research in this context. Second of all, biochar might not be the optimal use of biomass in combating climate change. Some commentators contend that converting biomass to biochar and applying it to soils might result in trade-offs with the development of other carbon dioxide removal options that might prove more effective from a standpoint of carbon removal, including bioenergy with carbon capture and storage, and afforestation and reforestation approaches, which could draw on the same feedstocks that we might use for biochar. And some argue that these could contribute more to both addressing climate as well as addressing critical energy needs. For example, Professor David Keith at the University of Chicago has argued that in order to reach the amounts of biochar production and application that would be needed to have an effect on global climate systems, we would need massive amounts of organic material that would have to be gathered in central locations. He argues that once we reach that point, burning the biomass as a replacement for coal in power plants would make far more sense than burying it. He says, quote, "Why bury reduced carbon that has all that energy? It's just senseless unless you were in a world that needed no energy. You want to make a fuel if you've got a lot of carbon and you're in a world that needs fuels." So that has both a climate component and perhaps a social justice component, at least in terms of developing countries. If we could eventually add carbon capture and sequestration technologies to these plants that were burning biomass, Keith concludes that the resulting greenhouse gas benefit would be almost twice as large as that yielded by burying the biochar. By contrast, one model concluded that the climate mitigation impact of biochar is somewhere between 17 to 22% greater than if the same biomass is combusted for energy. The model in this case indicated that the advantage of biochar over bioenergy is largely due to beneficial feedbacks from enhanced crop yields and soil greenhouse gas fluxes, right? But again, given all of those factors, some of which can be bedeviling in these cases, we clearly need more research in this context. And another study, probably without surprise to you now in this presentation, concluded that the optimal approach is context specific. One recent analysis concluded that the relative climate mitigation benefits of biochar compared with bioenergy is greatest in regions in which poor soils are growing biomass crops, and these crops can then benefit the most from biochar additions. By contrast, biomass combustion, according to this study, leads to greater climate mitigation impacts in regions with fertile soils, where coal combustion can be more effectively offset by biomass energy production on balance. Another potential risk associated with application of biochar to soils is that pyrolysis can, or the fruits of pyrolysis can contain toxins such as from municipal solid waste, and ash can also contain heavy metals. However, some studies also tout the potential of biochar applications to remove trace heavy metals from soils. All right, now let's move on to our next section, where we discuss the current status and the potential future for biochar production as a method to ameliorate climate change. First of all, let's look for demand for biochar in the CDR ecosystem. Well, one thing that we know at this point is that biochar is the most technologically mature of all engineered carbon dioxide removal processes. It has a technical readiness level of 8, which is very high. And biochar at this point provides the lion's share of engineered carbon dioxide removal credits in the voluntary carbon markets around the world. ExoMad Green, a South American company, has recently announced an annual removal capacity of 800,000 tons, which could make it bigger from a standpoint of carbon removal than any other carbon dioxide removal supplier in the world. But the other thing that should be noted is that there are only a small number of companies that are actually producing most of the market share of biochar, right? So from a standpoint of diversification, we're seeing very little in the market, at least at this point. Demand for biochar carbon credits have doubled each of the last 2 years. The latest modeling by the consultancy MSCI Carbon Markets suggested that demand for biochar projects could grow 20-fold over the next 10 years. The voluntary carbon market has seen a sharp upswing in interest in biochar during this decade. From less than 1,000 tons in 2020 in terms of sales, corporate use of voluntary credits from biochar projects jumped to 34,000 tons in 2022 and 65,000 tons in 2023, according to MSCI Carbon Markets. Buyers of biochar carbon credits, corporate buyers, have included names such as Microsoft, JP Morgan Chase, Swiss Re, and NASDAQ. And in March of 2024, Microsoft purchased 95,000 tons of biochar from a Mexican biochar plant. However, this all needs to be placed in perspective in terms of what we ultimately need in terms of carbon dioxide removal over the course of this century. At this point, what we know from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and other studies is that we may need as much as 10 billion tons of carbon dioxide removal by the middle of the century, and perhaps as much as 15 to 20 billion tons by the end of the century. By contrast, if we look at the amount of engineered carbon removal to date, we're only at about 0.12% of that 10 gigaton goal in 2050, right? Engineered methods overall in the carbon removal space have only delivered about 0.8 megatons of CO2 to date, right? And again, we need around 10 by the year 2050. Also, despite being the big player currently in the engineered carbon dioxide removal space, the amount of sequestration from biochar is still pretty de minimis. There were 107,000 tons of biochar credits delivered in 2023 for carbon removal. And then in the first quarter of 2024, biochar comprised about 81% of total sales and 91% of deliveries, but it was still at a very small number. Projections from the carbon certifier company Puro Earth suggest that biochar revenues could skyrocket from $600 million in 2023 to about $3.3 billion in 2025, which is an encouraging sign in terms of its growing prominence as a carbon removal approach. But this is still pretty modest in terms of the overall needs for carbon removal. Another recent study by Fortune Business Insights is less sanguine. That study projected that the global biochar market size will grow from about $763 million in 2024 to about $2.1 billion by 2032, which is a compounded annual growth rate of about 13.4%, but nonetheless is still a pretty small market. On the price front, over the last 2 years, the market value of biochar credits have followed a bullish trend, with many credits trading in the $100 to $200 range. These high prices may reflect the permanence of these removal credits in contrast to nature-based credits such as are derived from afforestation or mangrove, right? In these cases, you can claim that the CO2 is being locked up somewhere between a half a century to a full century, whereas for nature-based solutions such as trees, often we're talking about somewhere between 50 to 70 years. The prices for some biochar purchases have been as high as $200 per ton of CO2 equivalent, with the overall average for 2023 pegged at around $150. Now, this is far above the $5.80 average that's seen for voluntary carbon credits as a whole in 2023. That's largely dragged down by very cheap forest credits, although the deal sizes have been typically much smaller for biochar credits than the nature-based solutions. On average, the price of a biochar sequestration has been about $179 per ton, compared to an average of $388 per ton across all engineered CDR approaches. The consultancy MSCI Carbon Market suggested that increased competition and market compression could see prices soften between now and 2026 before potentially strengthening up to 2035. Well, that's demand and price, but what are the supplier trends, right? How much are we able to actually produce of biochar? So far, 2/3 of all biochar credits issued to date have come from projects in the United States, although the majority of credits issued in 2023 came from one South American company. Three major suppliers have emerged since the fourth quarter of 2023 and all are based in the global south, representing 42.9% of total biochar credits sold since 2023. The first is Exomad Green, a company that we highlighted above, who is the leader in both sold and delivered tons from biochar in 2023 and the first quarter of 2024. And this is a company that is based in Bolivia. Another major player is the Next 150 from Mexico. It's the second biggest seller of biochar. It recently sold 95,000 tons to Microsoft, which is the largest biochar deal to date, as well as 22,500 tons to Shell Environmental Products. And then the third company that we can highlight here is Biological, which is a supplier from Kenya that has also sold 10,000 tons to Microsoft in early 2024. Overall, biochar sales in 2024 are already 60% of the entire year of what we saw in 2023, and that's just through the first quarter of 2024, which portends continued strong growth this year. And with 74.5% of all-time durable carbon dioxide deliveries coming from biochar, purchasers appear to view it as a shovel-ready way of investing in durable carbon removal. So, what are the potential long-term carbon sequestration potentials from biochar? Several studies have concluded that biochar could remove on average about 1.8 gigatons of CO2 per year. However, there's a very wide range of potential estimates of sequestration potential in studies, ranging from only 0.8 gigatons per year up to 9, right? And these are based on very different assumptions. And quite frankly, when you have error bars that are that wide, it indicates that a lot more granular research needs to be conducted. Moreover, some of the studies with high potential estimates of sequestration are premised on not only using biomass waste, such as crop residues, for example, and forest residues, but also large amounts of land being set aside for the planting of dedicated biomass, such as trees. And this could have negative implications from an environmental perspective as well as a social justice perspective. One study, for example, projected the need for as much as 3.9 million square miles of dedicated biomass plantings for biochar to really get substantial amounts of sequestration. And that raises serious questions of sustainability and equity and justice. The planting of dedicated biochar stands of this magnitude, for example, might result in displacement of small farmers on lands that are wanted for biochar plantations. It also might result in trade-offs with other CDR options, as we talked about above, including BECCS and for afforestation and reforestation. At the national level, a recent study projected that countries with large populations might dominate in terms of these markets, and that's likely to be true. It just makes sense. There's more land, and thus more likelihood of being able to develop large biochar sort of stands. This includes China, the United States, Brazil, and India, with China having a potential, according to these projections, of sequestering about 468 megatons of carbon dioxide equivalent per year. The United States at about 398 megatons, Brazil at 303, and India at 225. A study also indicates that 28 countries could use biochar to address 10% of their emissions, including some African and South American countries exceeding 20% of all of their emissions reductions requirements. But feedstock availability also varies by regions, right? With some countries having more capabilities in terms of forestry residues, others in other contexts. And that's part of how the planning in terms of biochar would have to occur. So again, that's both context specific and requires a lot more granular sort of assessment and deployment. There are also many constraints in terms of scaling up biochar. This includes, first of all, high upfront capital investment requirements. For example, in the United States, potentially each production facility, feedstock supply, and biochar utilization pathway would require registration. And with costs for initial registration estimated at $100,000 per path, this could be prohibitive for all but the largest facilities. Second of all, there's uncertainty about optimal production systems and techniques for biochar. Third, while an interest in biochar is escalating, given its potential climate change mitigation and soil enhancement benefits, there remains uncertainty regarding the optimal methods, feedstocks, and production systems to generate biochar. These include needing to assess various sort of reactor types, heating rates, and the peak temperatures that can be utilized to produce biochar. And again, this means looking into the kind of systems we were talking about, such as simple kilns or advanced pyrolysis units. And this choice of production systems can have a substantial impact on biochar properties and soil impacts. There's also a lack of agreement on what specific feedstocks make the best biochar for differing soil types and crops. Another issue is there's a lack of long-term field studies quantifying the benefits of biochar, including co-benefits. There's also variability in feedstock and bio properties that can complicate adoption by potential buyers, such as farmers. Also, in the context of farmers, there's a possible yield decrease that can be seen in agricultural production at the outset of biochar use. And this could demotivate farmers to take initiatives in this direction, especially because many farmers operate on very narrow profit margins and thus are extremely risk averse. And then finally, regulatory issues in this context can be imposing, especially in the early days of biochar, where a lot of the regulations that would be applied, quite frankly, really didn't contemplate the use of biochar as a climate amelioration method and are trying to repurpose other statutes to be applicable. So the cost and complexity of air emissions permitting, for example, can be an important barrier to more widespread adoption of biochar production. States and tribal agencies have primacy for implementing the Clean Air Act, and different tribal, state, and local agencies often have different approaches in terms of permitting biochar units. And this arises from the multiple and emerging technologies, variation in air quality issues in different jurisdictions, and other sort of factors. And in some states, local air agencies have established regulations that are more granular over smaller areas. And this, again, could complicate the widespread deployment of biochar. So, in summary, biochar has the potential to be a potentially extremely important part of an overall portfolio of carbon removal approaches that will have to be deployed if we're going to reach these imposing levels of 10 to 20 gigatons of carbon dioxide removal annually by this century. But a lot more needs to be learned. A lot of very context-specific and granular analysis needs to be applied, and a lot of the regulatory issues need to be resolved if biochar is to take its place in the pantheon of potential carbon removal approaches in the future. Thank you very much.